Cybersecurity Frameworks and You, The Perfect Match, was a live webinar that was originally produced on Thursday, January 19th, 2016. The presenters for this presentation were Sam Bowercraft and David Hammerberg, both with McConley and Asbury. Enjoy this webinar recap and visit us online at www.macpas.com for more information about our future events and presentations.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Cybersecurity Frameworks and You. My name is Sam Bowercraft, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm here with Dave Hammerberg. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing well. Good afternoon.
We're excited to talk to you about cybersecurity frameworks today. Before we get started, we'll do some brief introductions. Dave is a principal with our firm. He has been here since 18-something. He's been here basically his entire career. And he deals with technology. He has a CPA, fraud investigation, and he has a heart for security. If you ask anyone around here, they will definitely tell you that he wants to be one of the most secure firms in the world, and he works diligently to do so, and we appreciate him for it. Dave, any other comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, security is definitely a forethought of everything I do, so appreciate that. Just introduce Sam here. I've worked with him in various engagements, security as well as, you can see in that slide there, forensic accounting. I've done stuff with him. Sam's got an interesting background, vast background, and it's great working with him. He's a CISA, and he just has a unique point of view. Oftentimes comes up with solutions that might not be what you want to hear, but it's what you need to hear, and hopefully, throughout this presentation, we can get some of those thoughts across.
Great, thanks, Dave. My nieces and nephews say the same thing about me. They frequently say that I say things that they don't want to hear, but they need to hear. Anyway, on our next slide, on our next slide, we have our objectives. So today we're going to be talking about understanding the importance of using a framework in your organization. We'll talk about how a framework can benefit an organization, and we'll also cover, just give a brief overview of the NIST Cyber Security Framework and another small framework to give you a taste of how frameworks look and how you might be able to use them within your organization. So we'll get started. So frameworks and their importance. We're going to talk about this, and on the next slide, what I'd like everyone to do, obviously everyone's sitting somewhere comfortably in their office or whatnot, if you just grab a pen and a piece of paper, and I would challenge you to just list all the information technology and security that are important for your organization to consider and address. And I don't want you to look anything up. I just want you to grab a piece of paper. Obviously, if you have a computer, you can type stuff down. And just off the top of your head, what areas of IT and security are important for your organization? So while you're doing that, I'll chat a little bit. Dave, you had something to say?
Yeah, something to add there. I mean, hopefully your list is fairly long. If you're thinking, maybe this, I'm here for CPE and it doesn't pertain to me, you have to ask your question, can your organization exist without security? And if the answer is it can, then you're probably not on the right web conference or the right conference here. But most organizations cannot exist without data security. So that list should be getting longer and longer as we speak.
Yeah. And then the point of this exercise is, as you're writing things down, I think what we'll all discover, and even if I was challenged to write this list down from memory, is you'll discover that you can think of a lot of different areas of security within your organization and areas you need to protect, but you're probably going to be missing a few. And it's not because you're not familiar with them. If you had your list and we looked at it and said, oh, well, what about X, Y, or Z? You would say, oh, yeah, I just forgot about it. One of the challenges with information technology is that it covers so many more areas than we recognize. And at any given moment, we're probably only focused on one particular area. And the importance of security within the organization is not just to focus on one area, but to focus on all of them. And we can only focus on one at a time, but it's important to revisit all the areas to make sure that everything's shored up and secure. So this exercise is really just that. It's like, well, do you think you remember everything? And if you can't, well, then maybe we need a better way to address IT security than just doing it from memory. And that's what this presentation is about. We're going to do a quick poll right now, and this poll you'll see pop up shortly and the question is, do you use an IT security framework now? So within your organization, just click on the poll answer and answer if you use a security framework now or not.
While they're clicking on that, Sam, I thought I'd ask you a question. Do you think you think we don't write down certain areas of security because we have a false sense of security? I mean, you think we just, glass over it?
I don't know if it's necessarily a false sense of security, Dave. I think sometimes it's not. Sometimes we do things because we're aware of them. Oh, it's my wife's birthday. I'll get her a birthday present. And sometimes we have a false sense of security, so we don't think it's an area to address. And I think there's a third option there, and sometimes it's not really prevalent on our radar, so we're not really focused on it. So it's not necessarily that we've decided that it's not important as much as there are other things that are more important. We might be putting this to the back burner because it's not a problem now, and there are other things that are more urgent. So let's see, so what kind of response did we get? And I don't see responses on my computer.
Sorry.
Do you see?
Yeah, Sam, this is Tyler just jumping back in. It looks like 75% of attendees answered yes, they do use IT security frameworks. Only 6% said no, so that's good, and around 20% said not sure.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's great. It's very important to know where you stand, and if you're not sure, it's a good question to ask. One of the things about security is that we all have responsibility around it, and it's important to just be aware of what you do know or don't know or just have uncertainty about. So let's talk about framework benefits a little bit. With regard to frameworks, one of the key things, and the exercise sort of exhibits this, and on the next slide you can see these benefits. Frameworks provide structure. Somebody else put a structure together for you so you can use that. You don't have to build from you can build from a pre-existing foundation. You can identify vulnerabilities more easily. You can analyze and evaluate the risk associated with those vulnerabilities. When you have a framework, you have something to work from, and it's not just a blank sheet of paper like we started with. There's efficiency. We can see cost savings in time and dollars. The frameworks are frequently more effective because they cover everything and they provide a starting point. We can build from that and then compare it to our existing organization. And it provides support. Frequently, frameworks are updated by other organizations on an ongoing basis. So instead of you having to do all this research on an annual basis about how certain things should be done within your environment for IT security, that framework is going to be updated from time to time. So those are the benefits. And framework drawbacks. Obviously, frameworks are great, but structure is good, but understanding is better. So sometimes people use frameworks as a crutch, and they use them as an absolute. So it's important to note that our frameworks are good guidance, but we need to take a look at them and see how they apply to the organization that we're operating in. Obviously, if you're in a larger organization, you need more structure and maturity in your processes. And if you're in a small organization, you need less, because you also have less resources. No battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. A framework is not a perfect fix-all for everything. The reality is that sometimes things work out perfectly and they align with our environment, and sometimes we need to tweak them a little bit more. But having a starting place is beneficial, but you still need to take a look at it and say, well, this is really going to work for us, or it's not going to work. And going from there is very important. And then area responsibility. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Yes, I agree with that. A framework's a great place to start, and it's something that evolves. It just continues to evolve. You can't just do it and put it down. And when you're dealing with, security, obviously, your hardest part is employees, the actual human factor. So that's always evolving in the framework. And that no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, that just makes me think of the human factor.
Right. And so there's the human factor, and there are just multiple variables, and things are going to change. I think sometimes we use a framework and we think, oh, well, this is the framework, it's going to work. But if it doesn't fit perfectly with the environment, I don't want to use it. Well, nothing's going to fit perfectly with anybody's environment. IT is so dynamic and specialized for each and every organization that there's going to have to be some customization. So when we talk about customization, on the next slide, we can talk a little bit about best practices. Now, I struggled with the term best practice for a long time, but I've finally come to grips with it. So best practice is not about the absolute best practice in the world. The best practice is really customized to your organization, your industry, your resources, and the personnel you have within your culture. So, as I said before, a small organization is going to have a different best practice than IBM or, Home Depot. If you're a small nonprofit, you have different best practices than a larger publicly traded company. So best practices focus on a human practice or method to perform a process. It's got to be somebody doing something. When we're talking about security best practice, it's security related. We want to see best practices being effective as shown by experience and results. Sometimes people say, well, that's our best practice here. And a question to ask is, well, is it validated in some way to show that it's really providing the results you expect? Just because you haven't had problems with a practice doesn't mean that it is the best practice. And then, of course, it's among the most effective practices used to perform this process. The reason we're talking about best practices is that frameworks, IT security frameworks, they present the best practice for these different areas of security. So when we're talking about a framework, when we're looking at these lists of controls later in these different areas, we're talking about the best practices based on experience and results from thousands of professionals and researchers. So we're relying on other people who have experience in this, not only putting it together, but also seeing how it works on an ongoing basis. Now, best practices are not automated settings. They're not business related as far as security goes. It's not a theory or a possibility. It's in place. We're thinking about putting in disaster recovery. Well, that's not a practice yet, so it doesn't really count. And as I said, it's not the one best practice. It's not the best of all ever, and nothing will ever be better. On the next slide, just a little bit, talks a little bit about kind of ranking best practice. I'm only going to talk about this briefly, but Chevron had put these in place, and basically from good idea to industry best practice. But you can see how when we talk about best practice and maturity, and I'll talk a little bit more about maturity later, is that a good idea is unproven. It intuitively makes sense. It could be successful. You could get the outcome you want, but you need to do some analysis. Good practice, I would encourage you within your organization to have good practices. This is a good level to be at. You want to have improved results, but those results need to be supported by data and analysis. You have to be able to say, well, we did X, Y, and Z, and it produced, no intrusions, or we, reduced the number of attacks on our firewall. You want to be able to speak to it in a positive way, versus what is very common is sometimes people say, well, nothing bad has ever happened to us, so what we're doing must be okay. And that's kind of a wait and see mentality. And when it comes to IT security, and I think Dave will back me on this, when it comes to IT security, you have to be more proactive, because the reality is that the bad guys are being more proactive every day. Would you agree with that, Dave?
I agree. I mean, that goes back to a false sense of security. If it didn't happen, then it's not going to happen. And I think we have to take the initiative and make sure that we put, practices in place to prevent something from happening.
Right. So when we talk about IT security as well, frequently IT departments within organizations may or may not have developed as formally as say, the accounting department. When we talk about accounting and finance and money, there are some pretty strict rules in place for quite a long time, the past 100 years, that have developed to really keep track of money. Double entry bookkeeping, processes and controls, reconciliations, because let's face it, everybody really cares about where all the dollars are. So we end up with some pretty standard operating procedures. And in the next slide, I encourage you to think about what kind of standard operating procedures you have within your IT security function. What do you do on a regular basis to make sure that security is really where you want it to be for your organization? Standard operating procedures are really key. When we talk about these with relation to finance, you get the same kind of benefits if you also apply standard operating procedures to IT security. If you have standard procedures, it facilitates communication. Hey, here's what we do, here's how we do it. And if somebody comes in and says, how are you doing these things? You can hand them the procedure and say, well, here's what we do and here's how we do it. And then people can have a better understanding versus verbal communication, which can be misunderstood or misconstrued. It provides consistency. The written document is very clear. It's always consistent. If you need to update it, you update it. That's fine. Things change. But if you don't have it written down, frequently I hear the reason, well, we're not going to write that down because it's just going to change. Well, frequently I find that people don't want to write things down because most of us don't like to write stuff down. It's just one more thing to document. But if we want to have consistency and we want to make sure that we can communicate things in a clear way, it's important to write down the basics. It doesn't have to be a tome. It doesn't have to be 500 pages. But if we're going to be doing it that way for the foreseeable future, we should write it down. It increases productivity. It makes it very clear what should be done. It increases certainty by the people both performing the process and who are the beneficiaries of the process. It provides for cross-training. Oh, Bob's going to be sick. Oh, well, someone has to cover Bob's job. Well, here are the processes that Bob covers on a daily basis. And it also creates, once you can cross-train, it also allows for efficiency gains because, well, we can have somebody else do it. We develop expertise in more than one area, and maybe Bob becomes so good at it that he can start doing other things that are value added to the organization. We're always looking for ways to gain effectiveness and efficiency. And on the one hand, it takes time to write stuff down, but on the other hand, you'll see gains in effectiveness and efficiency when you're documenting the core key things that you really need to write down. And make sure the right things are done, and they're done right. If you have a complex process, have a checklist. A book I frequently recommend to people is called The Checklist Manifesto. It's an easy read by Atul Gawande, but Checklist Manifesto is the title of the book. And it talks about the importance of checklists. We can't remember everything. Our lives are more and more complex every day. There's more and more things to remember, and they need to be remembered in a timely way and at the right time. So if you don't have a checklist, well, how do you know that you got everything done? And going back to the first exercise I asked you to do about writing down the areas of IT security, if you can't remember all the areas of IT security, how can you really expect to remember what you should be doing in each of those areas for IT security?
I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I think, Sam, there's a balance between verbal and written down. I mean, you could have someone that is completely, documents, and no one knows what those documents say. On the other hand, you have someone verbal and no documents. I mean, you have to have the documents as well as verbally express that information. I go back to it's a little different, but like security awareness training, most organizations are getting around to at least doing that annually. But if their policies aren't backing that up, how strong is it? So there's a line there that you have to be on both sides.
Absolutely. You want to prioritize the things you're documenting. But as you said, it's important to reinforce communication, not only through written documentation, but verbal. Some people are reading learners and some are audio learners, and you need to reinforce it with both. Absolutely. Next slide just talks a little bit about all the areas of IT. This is just one example. It's very easy to read, as you can see, I guess, if you have eagle eyes. But the point is there's a bunch of different areas, and we're going to be talking about some of these, but strategic planning, project management, logical access, service level agreements, third parties, IT personnel and training, IT governance, data management. There's tons of areas, segregation of duties, data integrity, internal network security, and these are just groupings because you can dig into any one of these areas and it can get more complicated very quickly. So having a framework to help guide you through this process framework acts as a checklist, and it'll help you to build your checklist from the ground up. So next slide. I just threw this in here. I think I beat this up enough, but it's so important to write things down. How's your memory? There's just so many benefits to writing stuff down. As Dave said, it's important to prioritize what you need to write down versus just documentation for documentation's sake. But identify what needs your focus. That's a great sentence. That's a terrible bullet point. Basically, you need to identify what your focus, what things you need to document. Next slide, we talk about security risk assessment. Now, this slide's in here to remind me to talk about how historically we've done IT security. Historically, by historically I mean about 10 years ago, everyone said, well, we need to be risk-based. We need to focus on risk-based. And we need to take a look at our environment and look at each area and decide how much risk is in each of these areas. And what that meant was that every organization had to go through a very significant process about basically starting from scratch. Well, here's the blank page. What systems do we have? What applications do we have? What locations do we have? What risks are associated with all these areas? And that made sense. And I'm not saying that this is a bad process, but it can be rather comprehensive. What frameworks allow for, and in particular the COBIT framework from ISACA, focuses on risk-based security assessments. It's not a bad process, and certainly if you go through it, you'll see a lot of value because you will turn over every rock, you will look under every pillow and into every closet and under every bed. You're going to find a lot of opportunities, but it does take quite a bit to do. Now, if we go to the next slide, what we can see is a comparison between risk-based and a prescriptive approach. As I said, risk-based is scope of the environment. You want to rank your risks. We already talked about this. Prescriptive really says you scope the environment, and then there's a list of stuff you do. You have to do these things. There's no question. There's prescriptive. So some things are very regimented, like things that have come out of regulation. You know, if the state says, hey, you have to report this to us on a monthly basis, well, you really better be doing that. That's prescriptive. Well, in the IT world, it's important to do risk-based security assessments because each environment is different. But the other part is, and this is why frameworks are so important in IT security today and going forward, is in the IT security realm, there are things that you should be doing, period. Now, the extent to which you do them is another question. But there is a checklist of things that you should be doing. And a framework will help to define those things to make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's when it comes to the really big rocks of IT security. And that's what we're going to talk about. Let's see. Mitigation. Yeah, so we're going to move past this slide. Real quickly, just to give you some context, frequently when Dave and I do presentations on fraud prevention, we talk about terrible things that happen in the world when people commit fraud. We just wanted to remind everyone here that cybercrime is simply a crime that involves a computer and a network. If we go to the next slide, these next slides are really designed to frighten you. This is a reality. Whether you're aware of the risk or not, these risks exist. People are working to hack. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I think we're looking for the framework to prevent these kinds of crimes. I know for organizations I deal with, in that list of types of cybercrime, malicious software is really high on the list, ransomware, et cetera. There's a lot of things in the frameworks that will help deter or even prevent that from happening. So, bringing up the types of cybercrime, what is cybercrime is important because we have to know, sort of from an IT person's point of view, what our goal of actually doing all this work is.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. And just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean that you are not at risk. Because basically, if you're connected to the internet, you are at risk for all of these things. Would you agree with that, Dave?
I agree with that. I mean, like I said in the beginning, your organization probably will not exist without sufficient data security. One breach in a small to medium-sized organization is enough to close its doors.
Yeah. So if we go forward 2 slides here, just talking about combating cyber crimes. One of the reasons I highlighted security awareness here is that about 95% of breaches, I've seen different statistics, anywhere between 90 and 99% of breaches are a result of a user clicking on a link or going to a website or providing details they shouldn't, that then allow a malicious actor to access to the network. So security awareness training and making sure your users are not clicking on inappropriate links or providing password information on the web, anything along those lines, making sure their antivirus is up to date. Users have a very strong responsibility to use their computers wisely, but also to make sure that their computers are secure, and that happens by giving them training at least on an annual basis. And even, monthly reminders, hey, don't click on this stuff. It is a huge opportunity, risk and opportunity for hackers. So I highlight security awareness here just as a, hey, if you're not doing it now, it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is. You should be doing some level of security awareness, even if you just get on YouTube and find security awareness, homemade videos, read about it, because it's very important to preventing breaches and bad things.
It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier in our professions to take care of the firewalls, the routers, the switches, the IPSs, the IDSs. It's that human factor. We can put in dual factor authentication and do all this stuff, but that's that wily human factor that we need the security awareness. And I think it's a tough sell for a lot of IT people to develop that security awareness to be effective at it. So it's very important.
So next slide just has a question for you. Are you willing to operate your information technology environment in an ad hoc and informal manner, given the risks in the world today related to cybersecurity? And hopefully the answer is no. Now, I think our poll said 75% of our attendees know that they're using a framework within their organization, and I think 6% were unsure. So I encourage, cybersecurity is about getting better every day. You don't have to fix everything at once. So when we get into the framework here shortly, you may look at this and say, wow, that's a lot of stuff to do. Well, start picking and choosing the high priority ones. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's what you want to do. You want to just start getting a little bit better every day, every week. The frameworks can help you to do that and stay focused. And after you get through everything, then go back through the list. Okay, well, we did this last year. Do we need to make any changes this year? So it's very important, and to just do the right things so we get outcomes that we like. We just don't want bad things to happen. So the next slide is this fun cartoon. Here we have, I believe that's me in the sports car and Dave with the hammer.
That looks about right.
Yeah. Dave built his own boat at one point, so I think that's accurate. So this.
I was wearing those same shorts.
I wasn't there, but I believe you. So the poll question here is: do you want to reinvent the wheel? We'll poll everybody. Oh, I do not want to reinvent the wheel. Awesome. I don't get to vote. Wow. How disappointing. But the key question here is, nobody wants to reinvent the wheel. So 6% would like to reinvent the wheel. Those are people who probably know me or Dave. Thank you for you who voted yes. I look forward to your new wheel designs. So you'll see my email at the end of this presentation. So please provide your new wheel designs. Patent them beforehand. So let's talk about cybersecurity and basic requirements. What's the purpose of cybersecurity? So basic requirements include your IT inventory. What do you need to protect? What data does it have? You need to do some level of risk assessment. What risks do you face? Do you have intellectual property? Are you a distributor? And if your warehouse goes down, you can count the amount of money that you lose on an hourly basis. those big risks are key. What kind of structure do you have of a network? Is it everything in one office? Do you have multiple offices? Do people work from home? And having a structure and a checklist for that, and continuous improvement. The world is changing outside these walls, wherever you are. Are you changing to respond to those changes? Just because you don't perceive change doesn't mean it's not happening. The next slide summarizes the key aspects of security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is just keeping stuff secret. Availability is just having access to it. But integrity is the one that people is going to ruin your life the most. I ask this question to our clients, and I say, would you prefer that I tell you that 1% of your data is corrupt, or 5% of your data is corrupt, or wrong, or inaccurate? And frequently people say, well, 1%. And then I say, okay, well, if you knew 1% of your data was inaccurate, would you still have to go fix it? And the answer is frequently yes, they would, because nobody wants to run their business knowing that they're only 99% right. So whether you have a 1% error, or a 5% error, or a 10% error, maintaining integrity and knowing that the data that you're looking at is correct is a very big piece of having comfort that you have the information to move forward. So a lot of data security focuses on confidentiality and availability. But also remember, we don't want people switching numbers on us, because if the integrity starts to slide, you immediately have concerns. That's going to raise your stress level big time. So let's talk about the NIST Cyber Security Framework. So the NIST Cyber Security Framework, on the next slide, was created as a result from an executive order that the President Obama issued, and basically said, hey, let's put together a voluntary framework based on existing standards for anybody to use. And I've been exposed to this framework over the past couple of years, and I'm a fan of it. I like it because it's straightforward. It tells exactly what you need to address, and it groups it nicely. So the next slide shows the 5 areas that the NIST Cyber Security Framework covers. And each of these grouping families sort of walks you through the process that someone like Dave, who is our IT director, goes through to protect data within the organization. So we identify data. We do that in areas that we need to protect: asset management, governance. We do risk assessment, risk management strategy. We protect it. We provide access control and awareness and training, data security, information protection procedures, maintenance, and protective technology. We detect issues, anomalies, and events. It could be an incursion, a hacking incursion. We have continuous monitoring, and we want to detect things that go wrong. Then we want to respond to those things that we identify. Something crashed, something failed, someone attacked us. We have response planning. We want to communicate how we're responding to those things and analyze it. And we want to mitigate the issue and then come up with improvements, so to either fix the issue or prevent it in the future as well. And then we want to recover. If something bad happened, there was a fire, there was a hacking incident, we want to be able to recover from that incident, and again, have improvements, and then communicate to people about how we recovered and how things will be addressed in the future if there are going to be changes. Each one of these families, on the next slide you can see, there's the function: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And then each one has categories. And each category has controls. Now, I'm not going to go through all the controls here. I'd like you to stay awake for the rest of the presentation. However, I will go through a few of the controls on a couple slides later. So if we skip forward a couple slides, so if you just go, so basically these are the categories I already read through with the different functions. But on the next slide, one more. Here's just a sampling of some of the cybersecurity controls within each of these functions. So the first 2 letters are ID, identification, and the AM stands for asset management. So we want to So these are things, so now we're back to the prescriptive aspect of this framework, which is, this is stuff that you really should be doing. You should have a physical devices list and physical devices and systems within the organization are inventoried. Do you know all the devices that are connected within your system? Because if you do, then you know what you need to protect. And if you don't, then how do you know what you need to protect? Another control within asset management, IDAM4, is external information systems are cataloged. Are you using cloud software of some sort? Do you have a third-party vendor? Do you have a service provider who provides you with some sort of processing? Who are they? And how do you get comfortable that they're doing what they need to do? And this is just a sampling of the controls within the NIST Cyber Security Framework. In the governance, organizational information security policy is established. Do you have a policy that just says, hey, don't do bad things. Don't go to bad websites. Don't click on links that you shouldn't in emails. If you have a question about a link, contact IT so that they can help you out. Policy really helps define and set rules for everyone so that they know what's expected of them, and it can be a valuable resource. Risk assessment 1, asset vulnerabilities are identified and documented. You should be doing some level of risk assessment. As I said, and we talked about this earlier briefly. We want to know about potential business impacts and likelihoods. If the distribution system goes down and trucks can't go out the door, there's an impact there. And if it's significant, then maybe you need to have a backup to that system. Risk responses are identified and prioritized. This is a real key one. Sometimes we do risk assessments and we say, here are the risks and here's kind of what we're doing. But sometimes we don't always prioritize what really needs to happen first. Part of disaster recovery planning is determining how quickly systems need to come back up. And sitting down with management, this is where having an IT steering committee, this is one of my soapboxes. If you don't have an IT steering committee, you should have one, where IT sits down with business and talks about what the business needs and what IT needs and why. Because having that face-to-face conversation, it's only going to increase the quality of communication between IT and the business and subsequently increase how IT is serving the business. You want to manage remote access. As you can see, there's a lot of things that really need to be taking place. And again, this is just a sample of these. Now, on the next slide, there's another framework sample. This is the SANS Top 20 Critical Controls. And SANS came out with these several years ago, and they said, these 20 controls are things that will mitigate 95% of your risks. I don't really know what the 95% comes from, but these are pretty good. And as you just read down through them, what's your inventory of devices and software? Do you have an inventory of your software? What software should be on your network? What software should not be on your network? Do you have secure configurations for your devices? Do you have malware defenses? What kind of wireless network do you have? Is it open? Do you know if it's open? Do you have data recovery capability? Can you get data back? Can you get your servers back? And validated manually means that you test it and you confirm that you can get back. Security skills assessment. Your IT department is a living, breathing thing. And just as the world is changing outside, you need to make sure that your IT personnel are getting the training they need so that they stay sharp. You want them to be the sharpest knives that you have to make sure that your environment is as well protected as possible. So making sure that they have good training is paramount. And the other thing is making sure that you retain IT personnel in a positive way is paramount too, because that guy who's been here for 15 years, if he decides to leave for whatever reason, you're going to lose a lot of operational knowledge unless he documented it. But that's a question. But he still knows kind of how things are set up and how they work and how to get things back and running. And this is where the value of human capital and maintaining relationships and communication, and we're back to the steering committee and these risk assessments, because it's not just about outside risks, it's about inside risks as well. As you can see, this is just 20 items, and you can, I think just by looking at these, you can see that there's a lot of work that can go into each of these areas. So some of it obviously needs to be prioritized sooner rather than later, depending on your organization and the risks. So if we skip, yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Sam, you mentioned that steering committee a couple times, and for me that's just a useful area where you can really get your thoughts across, and it's really a time for you to sell. I mean, security, a lot of the security appliances, et cetera, is not cheap, and we have to make sure we have a good business platform to discuss it, with the steering committee, and make sure that management's aware of the needs, and they're aware of the needs, they know the consequences, et cetera. It's going to be a lot easier getting what you need to prevent a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And the steering committee is an opportunity for, as Dave said, selling. And it's not quite selling, but I understand what you're saying, Dave. It's about communication. Business people and IT people speak in very different language. And when it's important to get them in the same room so that when the business says, well, we're not going to do that, the IT group can say, well, if you don't do that and this problem occurs, you'll be down for a week. Like there's nothing to be done. Because I think one of the misconceptions that people who don't work in IT a lot have is that it's kind of easy to get things done. And I think that occurs in almost any area. If you don't work in accounting, and you don't have experience with accounting, when you want something changed in accounting, you just think, oh, just make this change. But obviously there might be, repercussions to that change where it's a lot more work than just clicking a button. And I think that frequently happens in IT, where there's a perspective of, well, the IT guys just went and did it. I mean, how long did that take? Well, it can take quite a bit of time to make a change and validate it, make sure it's working correctly, so that when it gets turned on right away, it's working absolutely the way it is. And those IT steering committee meetings are about making that understanding universal between business and IT. And it's an education process, because just as IT needs to educate business, the business needs to educate IT about priorities and what's being done and why, so that IT can serve them better. Everybody needs to help everybody. We're all here for each other. If we jump forward 2 slides, I just want to talk briefly about cyber maturity as we come up on time here. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So if you have any questions, please start thinking them up and typing. Cyber maturity here, this is really process maturity. And there are different levels. In any process within your organization, you're going to have different levels of maturity. If you have no framework within your organization and you're just kind of doing security by the seat of your pants, and hopefully that's not the case, you're kind of at partial or ad hoc. You kind of know what risks you're dealing with, but you're not really working with anybody. And we want to move up the scale here. Obviously, the risk informed, there are processes in place. They're not necessarily enterprise-wide, and there's general collaboration, but it lacks formal capabilities. I encourage you and your organization to move towards Tier 3, repeatable. You want to have formal policies for risk management processes in IT security. You want to be able to speak to them, change them if you need to, but then you can share those with the business, and the business can say, well, here are our objectives as well. You want to be able to communicate that in a clear fashion. Adaptive, that's like the extra credit level in my mind. It would be great to get there. They're based on lessons learned and embedded in culture with proactive collaboration. You want to be working toward that in all areas. But if you don't get there in every area, that's okay too. But being repeatable is definitely where you want to be, where you know what you're doing patch management, you're doing logical access, you can communicate those processes clearly with everyone. And not only can you repeat them, but you can tell people why you're repeating them and why they're important. Being able to speak to it and justify it is key. So forward 2 slides, we'll just talk about these documents. The NIST Cyber Security Framework is free. It's available to everybody. I encourage you to go check it out. It's about 44 pages with some explanation. There's a bunch of explanation at the beginning about how the framework works and where it came from. But the framework proper is maybe 9 pages with all the controls. Again, I went over a sample of them just to give you an idea. But I encourage you to go through that list of controls in your environment and say, oh, these things apply, these things don't apply. And then for those things that do apply, to ask yourself, well, what are we doing in this area, and do we think that's enough? It'll give you a stronger sense. Not only do you have coverage in all the areas that you think are important, but it'll get everybody on the same page about what's being done and whether it's adequate. Hey, we're comfortable with everything we're doing. Okay, if you check the box on everything and you're happy, fantastic. But I think what you'll discover is that there are certain areas that could probably use a little bit of improvement and polish, and then you can make a list of things you want to improve, and then start at the top. Well, this is the most important. We really never checked our disaster recovery process. We should probably do something about that. Let's plan to do a disaster recovery test in November. That's a good time of year to do it, or whatever it might be, and get that ball rolling. So prioritizing, but we can't prioritize things without making a list. We can't make a list without going through a framework and saying what we are and are not doing. A little bit more about the maturity model there. And then the SANS Top 20 controls, there's a link there for you as well. The links are here, but if you Google those keywords, you should come across it as well. In summary, cybersecurity frameworks, they're an invaluable tool to help you and your organization to make sure you're doing the right things. It's a good starting point. It's a good checklist. It's an opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants. There's no sense in trying to reinvent the wheel. Take someone else's wheel and make it better. And by making it better for your organization and customizing it, I think you'll see opportunity to increase the value of the IT organization within your company and how effective and efficient it is in achieving the objectives that you have for it and helping the business to be successful as well. So with that, Dave, do you have any further comments?
No, not really. I mean, we just got to be proactive, and it's an important thing to have a framework. Otherwise, you're just going at it, where you hope your vulnerabilities are. So we just have to learn from others and make sure that our organizations are safe.
Excellent. With that, we will go to the boards and see if there are any questions.
Yes, Sam, we actually did have two questions that were submitted. The first question is related to the IT committee that you referenced to kind of review different business and IT prerogatives. And so I think this question is just kind of asking if you could review the type of committee this would be, who would be on it, and essentially the purpose of the committee.
All right, so who's on it and the purpose of the committee? Sure. So the IT Steering Committee, the purpose of the IT Steering Committee is, in my opinion, is to bring business and IT together to discuss IT priorities for the business. Frequently, the business will bring those priorities, we want our systems to be up, I want to have email all the time, and just make sure the printers are printing. But there's another part to that, because IT also has their own priorities that they're addressing that are kind of under the surface that the business doesn't really pay attention to. And that's not to say it's bad, it's just that it's not a priority for the business, which is security, firewalls, web filters, and other things. So the purpose of the committee is to bring key stakeholders from the business and IT together to talk about those things. Just as the business has a strategic plan, IT should have a strategic plan every year as well, saying, here are the things that we're working on, and 60% of our time is spent just keeping the lights on, and then we have 40% of our time that's available for special projects. That might be new software installations, that might be custom reporting, it could be anything. But talking to the business and saying, listen, getting everybody in a room to say, so that ITT can say, listen, 60% of our time is setting up users and fixing people's laptops because they broke a setting and fixing printers. When the business understands that, instead of just thinking that IT is sitting down in their dark hole in the basement, doing whatever and just waiting for a phone call, it helps to bring light into what the what IT is doing and why they're busy with things and what they're focused on. And it gives an opportunity for the business to say, oh, well, this thing that you're working on over here, that's not really not that important to us. Could you work on this other stuff? And for IT to say, well, yes, some of this stuff is important. Well, you don't think this is important, but it's actually important for these reasons, and to educate the business about those. As far as who should be on those committees, I encourage the CEO or executive director to be on the committee. They're in charge, and they oversee business and IT. I encourage chief operating officers and CFOs to be on those committees. Depending on how large your organization is, you might have some business unit heads like marketing and HR. And these are all people in business who are using IT in a very specific way and have specific IT needs. Now, conversely, on the IT side, depending on how large your IT environment is, it's good to have several people from IT on the committee, not just the IT director. And I see this from time to time as well, where the chief operating officer represents IT on the IT steering committee. And I discourage that because it doesn't give operations personnel within IT the opportunity to answer questions that the chief operating officer may not know about, or insight that he doesn't have hands-on experience with. So I encourage IT directors to be on that committee. And if they have managers of departments, if you have an organization that's large enough to have an IT director and, let's say, someone who's in charge of security and someone who's in charge of application development, having them in the group as well. Again, it's a committee meant to focus IT on the business, but also to educate the business on what IT is doing and why, so that everybody leaves that meeting being on the same page about the priorities for IT and the purpose and the reasons for that. And there should be an agenda, a standing agenda. I encourage monthly meetings. And there should be minutes from that saying, okay, well, we talked about this stuff, and here's what we really need to focus on going forward.
Great. Thanks, Sam. We just have
more
one.
Communication is always better. And the last question?
Yeah, last question. I know we're running short on time, so you can feel free to answer it somewhat quickly. But this person was just asking how often you would recommend doing security awareness training.
Yeah, so at least annually. And I would encourage that there be at least quarterly, but monthly would be better, emails just reminding people about good security practice and hygiene. We want to keep that in front of people. We want people to be aware that it's important. How do we communicate that things are important? Well, we tell them. We say, hey, listen, make sure you have a strong password. It protects us from liability and you from problems. So, yes, in-person security awareness training at least annually, with emails at least quarterly, but monthly is better.
Security awareness training could be a multitude of things. When someone says security awareness training, I guess you're thinking of a conference room with everyone in it, or a LinkedIn session, or something where a group of people are there. You have a PowerPoint and you say, don't do this, etc. But security awareness is really an ongoing thing. Are you phishing your employees? Are you making them aware of different scenarios? So it's you definitely want to have that one-on-one conference room course security awareness training, like Sam said, but you also want to be on an ongoing basis, trying to stay one step ahead of the attackers.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I will thank you all for attending our webinar today and for your extra few minutes of attention. I hope this has been helpful to you. Our emails are available. If you have any questions or you have other thoughts or would like some more information, feel free to email us. We'll help you as best we can, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for attending.
Thank you once again for joining us for this presentation produced by McConley and Asbury. We hope you join us for our upcoming events. You can stay up to date with news and learn more about our upcoming presentations by visiting us at www.macpas.com. Thanks again, and have a great day.